think I'll go ahead and start. It's sort of difficult dealing with. This is Ken Boote, and I'm in the office with Cheryl Porter, sharing her computer. And the slides that I'll be using will have elements from the different teams, both in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. We did a webinar back September 19 with the Sub-Saharan African group. Now how do I move the...
You need to tell them to...
I have to tell someone to advance the slide. So, ICRSAT, can you advance the slide? Good, good. Okay. The goals that we have are really to review the figures and the tables that will help you interpret the crop modeling proportion of these integrated regional assessments. We're going to look at figures and tables that deal with the crop model calibration of genetic coefficients. We'll discuss the inputs and assumptions for the farm survey simulations. That will be done mostly as text. We will discuss the figures for the cumulative probability distributions of the farm survey yields observed and the simulated with two models, and then discuss the simulated response for the baseline compared to some climate change simulations, and have one slide that discusses typical adaptations.
Carolyn asks that you pause after every slide and ask for questions.
For questions, okay. This is mostly an introduction on where we're going, but we will do that with the next slides that deal with the figures for the output. So next slide, please. This is a review of what should be in your poster and eventually a little in more detail in the actual final reports. So in your presentations, we want to have a list of the, say, 5 to 10 genetic coefficients for the cultivar that you used, with something on statistics and the figures that might show one-to-one if it's appropriate. You should have a text description of the farm survey yield data, but not detailed. It's where's the site, the weather, the soils, the cultivar, typical sowing dates, the water management, and the fertilizer situation. So the general. I'll talk a little more about initial conditions, but again, the detail is not in your poster, but it will be in your final report, where you discuss your assumptions on the initial soil water, nitrate ammonium, crop residue, start of simulation. We can advance that? Maybe. Okay. Fertilization dates, what you assume for the soil fertility, the fraction inert carbon in the APSIM or the SOM3 in the DSAT. Now, figures for the poster, yes. Cumulative probability of exceedance for two models and the observed. This is strictly for the survey years with some interpretation. Then you'll have a box and whisker type plot that shows for one single representative site under baseline or 30-year current climate, and then a future 30-year climate and 30-year climate with future adaptations with interpretation. Now the last point, the box and whisker of yield for a single representative site for 5 GCMs or 20 GCMs. This is what Alex did. This is not to be done on all 47 or 155 farms. And we've had some disagreement there. Questions? And who are they going to tell if they do have?
They'll have to chat.
You'll have to type. Okay. We'll keep watching for questions on this. And how do we advance it? There. With your mouse. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump to the next one too.
There is a question here. What's the difference between 5 and 6? That's from Garrett.
Do you remember the situation where Alex was wanting to have 20 different GCMs that had means and variability change? This is only to be done with one single farm, or potentially even the site where you did the Sentinel cultivar calibration. I know that maybe 5 is not the same. Maybe 5 really is the farms, and we'll get to that. I think you're right.
So Garrett says, but 5 is also one site.
Yes, and maybe I've misinterpreted this, and you'll see something coming up later where you will show this for the mean of the 30 years of weather variation. So let's say you have 47 farms, as in Machaca. You'll have 47 mean values that are the 30-year average. So I think I maybe have misrepresented that.
Yeah, so here's from Sonali.
Yes.
She says 6 is what Alex wanted.
Right.
Where you're looking at just one site.
Yes. 6 is what Alex wanted. 5 is what the rest of us wanted. Okay. Let's go on to the next. This will become clearer when we get to the last slide. This is a discovery system for me too. I've moved 2 slides. Now this is the first example of how you might show something in the poster. This is from South India. I've modified it a little bit from the August meeting, but it's identifying the crop, the cultivar, the model, the location, in this case, Angrao, Hyderabad, the years, what the treatments were, and then at the bottom, it lists the genetic coefficients for the cultivar as solved. So it's a case of saying, what did you do? So this would be the data set. Any questions here? The next follows through with this, so if this is the same topic. What's happening now? Mouse, multiple control. Okay, this is something that many of you may not be able to do, and the reason the one-to-one looks really good on the yield here is because the range comes from nitrogen, not necessarily years. But what you want to do is to show some evidence of model calibration, listing the model, the cultivar, the site, statistics, and either a one-to-one like this or something that is a table that gives you the simulated versus observed for anthesis and maturity. Remember, life cycle is probably the most important thing that you're calibrating. Questions on this one? These are the 2 types of tables, text, visuals you would have for Sentinel site calibration of cultivar traits. This is detailed. We went through this many times about what's available from the yield survey simulations in blue, and in green it's an indication of what probably is not available that comes from the assumptions from the agronomist. Now look at the blue on the top. What we don't want detail for the posters. For your final report, yes. But for the poster, just type basically a simple summary that says how many farms did you have, how many weather sites, the soils, the cultivar, 1, 2, or 3, names, general sowing dates, typical fertilization, and a simple explanation of the initial condition assumptions. Because posters really don't have room for the detail. Any questions on this? I'm going to jump to the next one. It's the same topic, but again, this is detail for final report, not in the poster, but document your initial conditions. And in this case, just give a brief text summary of your assumptions on what you did to initialize soil water, nitrate, ammonium, crop residue. Did you run the Sentry? Did you use the dome to set stable soil organic carbon? Was it irrigated or was it not irrigated? Was the CO2 turned on? As in APSIM maize does not have it turned on by intent. And document the weather and the CO2 levels. So who asked the question here?
Nobody.
No one asked the question?
Somebody started typing.
Started typing but quit. So this is detail that is not appropriate in the poster, but some text to describe that is you need to let people know what you did, or they're just guessing. Okay, this is the first set of slides that will start looking at cumulative frequency distributions. This is from South India, and it's probably been improved since the end of July. It shows a cumulative probability of exceedance for cereus maize with a one-crop model and the observed farm survey yields. Now, this is also telling us some things that should not be done. Remember that figures need to stand by themselves when you have a figure in a paper or a figure in a presentation. This one I could not tell what model was used, what year, what site. So list the crop models, list the crop, list the site, and in this case it's 1 year. And the other point I would make is that you should not use any smoothing of across point. Just connect the points. So this is more an example of how to improve on a figure. Questions? The basic XY is just fine. Okay, here's another one. This is from the IGB, and this is also from about 6 weeks ago. What's missing here is, again, we're missing the site, what region in India, what year. There's no interpretation on the figure if it's in a PowerPoint for a talk. This is the DSAT style showing, what do we call it?
Probability.
I actually prefer the probability of exceedance, the way that the Australians do that. So that's the APSIM group. The Sheen is typing. I'll see what his comment is before I move. Of course, he's been doing that before. Zero yields are a model problem, or do you report real zero yields? I think you need to, if the model simulates zero, I think zero is on the figure. If you have a zero yield in the farmer field, that's a real value. It probably should have some explanation, though. Yes, this one has no zero yield. I agree, Subhash. I think that Dasheen is asking the question hypothetically. Okay, this is from the Suwara team, and it shows, again, I'd like to see sites and years. Remember that what we're looking at here is strictly the variability coming from the farms, and we did on the last 3 visuals. This is not necessarily climate variability. In some cases, you only had 1 weather station. So the variability is coming from the farmer variation in yields. And the question is, does the crop model capture that? And this group, the Suwara team, made a statement to this. It's the second bullet point that says the models were having difficulty capturing the full range of yield variation observed. There are sometimes reasons for that. look at the peanut example. The farmers had a large range. Both models had a small range. The peanut models have nitrogen fixation, and therefore the soil nitrogen and soil carbon supply doesn't make much difference. So in fact, I expected this. The maize models are a little interesting to me. Series maize showing less response and the APSIM showing a larger range of variation. Millet example looks very good with at least 2 of the 3 models, but we think there's an issue that the APSIM model had a tillering issue they were planning to fix. So this not to be used as an indication that the model is not working right. But these are good visuals. Questions? We may have one more or so of these. We'll back up if we have to. Sheena is typing. If you can make a simple interpretation of your farm survey yield as to what something means, I think that's the point. Not detailed, but some interpretation. Particularly if they're not working right. I'll keep going until I see the questions here. Here's one more example. Okay, Murthy, why the wide variation in millet yields with APSIM? APSIM has basically uses intercropping to handle millet. It says every new tiller is a new plant. And it's the only model that has that, where you have a tillering crop, as in sorghum or millet. And there were some issues with how that additional intercrop, the first tiller or second tiller, worked. It's only a tillering problem, no other problem. And I think it may be an instance of how they did it. Yeah, okay. Why not maize? Maize does not tiller. Okay, maize is a single-eared, no multiple tillers from the same seed. So there's no problem. I think that the APSIM group has solved this, but I'm not positive yet. So direct your question to John Hargraves if you
Yeah, I knew they were
answer.
working on that, so I think the problem may have been solved, but I don't know for sure either.
So the rest of you who are not using millet, don't worry about that. I'll go ahead with the next slide. The next slide is another probability of exceedance, and this is from Pakistan. And you can see that the single slide that they gave me, I put the middle blue in there with underline. So be sure that a figure stands by itself. You would not know this had been done in Pakistan or what year without saying that. So again, identify the crop, the region, the year, the country, and depending on team. If it's your poster, yes, it's obvious, but the rest of the figure I really like. The probability of exceedance looks good for the way you showed the 2 models and the observed and the statistics on the same slide. Someone from Pakistan is responding. The root mean squared, D statistic, R squared are fine with the model comparison. The figure's good. It's just the captioning. It was rice. Rice Zone 2010. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just saying that this is what you need to do when you put your presentation together for somebody. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. This is just a South Africa example, and it was very uniquely different. Now we're going to try to move on from looking at the single survey farm sites and look at the implications for climate change. Now this one is something I don't totally understand. There are 47 farms in this Machakos example in Kenya, and the observed are the solid circles here. What I do not understand is whether those are single years for the baseline climate and the climate change, or whether they're 30-year means. But this is the point that when you move forward with the 30-year current climate and future climate, that what you need to do is calculate the average yield over the 30 years and plot those against the and in this case, to me, it would not totally make sense that it should mimic the same distribution if the weather is different. I'm going to move to the next one. Now, this is also Machakos. 47 farms with 4 different climates. Now, there's something very important here. This, I think, is the Gerrit Hogenboom's question about what was the difference between item 5 versus 6 on the second slide that I showed you. This is item 5. This is each point on this graph is the 30-year average for a given farm. So if you look at the yellow diamonds, every one of those points is a mean yield for the farm. So the distribution of variation that you see here is from the farms. It is not interannual variation because you've averaged over that. Now, what moves the lines left and right here is what I call the climate effect. Not the weather year, but the average effect of temperature over the 30 years, or the CO2. And I think that's an important point when you get into interpreting this in your reports. Question?
No, that was just a technical.
No, we're good. Now this one is different. This visual is the one that would be like point number 6. Basically taking a single site, in this case it was a single district in South Africa, but it would be a single farm or single site, and then you're simulating with 2 different models and creating a box and whisker. And in this case, this is showing interannual variation. And you would do this for, say, all 20 GCMs that Alex wanted to do. So, important point is to think about the source of variation coming from farms or from interannual variation. This is a slide from Pakistan, and the Pakistanis and Gerrit can give me help on this because, again, I would like to have known the crop, the year, in fact, maybe not weather year because using 30, so take that away, but the crop in the region and the team. And what I'm not clear on in this visual is whether the variation is from interannual variation or farms. If it's the mean yield over the 30 years for each farm, okay, the points on here, are the points the mean yield over the 30 years, and therefore the variation comes from the farms? Yeah. From the farm variation. Okay, that's good. But again, explanation that this is a 30-year mean per farm. would help tremendously. I think it's critical for us to keep separate the concept of interannual variation, which is what Alex Rowan was going after, and compared to the variation coming from the farms. The economists only want the variation among farms. They do not know how to handle interannual variation yet. Dashina says, I think we should concentrate more on interannual variation than with farm variations. I think it's good to bring up the point, but keep the two separate in your discussion. It's something that I'm beginning to understand here only after working with this with you, that there are these misunderstandings between what the economists are getting and what Alex is asking for and what the crop modelers are doing. So interpretation is important. Other than that, for the Pakistanis, this is a beautiful set of slides. I like the nice color and the box and whisker. So good explanation, and you'll be ready to go with this figure. And also interpretation somewhere. What's causing that box and whisker to move up and down? And why can't you show a box and whisker for the baseline? Isn't that also a 30-year simulation? Think about that. Why should the baseline be missing the same nice little colored box? He said, it's missing in ours. Okay. Don't know why, but it should be the same if these are the 30-year means per farm. The other point was it sent completely but didn't get to me.
It messed up the labeling too.
The labeling is changing, so I think this is our problem on the, let's say, internet and sending. Do explain interpretation as to what causes a change here. Why is the yellow, for example, on the one on the right, why is it way up and down, whereas it is not that way with the APSIM model? Okay, moving on. Why not? Okay, this is also from Pakistan. Again, identify the crop in the region. I'm not so sure if Sonali's on with this. I would like her to think about this and give feedback to all the teams as to whether this type of figure is appropriate.
It's not a time series.
No, at the bottom is not time series. These are showing individual farms. Okay, so the up and down is, I'm wondering whether this isn't better shown in a box and whisker style that shows the farmer variation. Yeah, Sonali says, I'm not sure that framing it like this is accurate. Yeah. So think about this. I think box and whisker is better. And then discuss the source of the variation. I know it says something here that certain farm sites are consistently down with future and baseline weather. So if you can figure out what this means for you, but I think one thing is it's much too busy to give to a person standing at a poster. I see the difference, and that is that the colored line is below, and to me that means that this is a poor weather situation and you need to leave it there. And Sonali also thinks that box and whisker would be better. Yep, and it implies that there's a time series, and it's not time series. Oh, we got discussion going. I'll show later on where somebody did show a real-time series. Now, the x-axis is farms, not time series. I'm going to argue that time series as an x-axis is not correct either. We'll show you one from the IGB. Everybody's typing. Be sure you have a clean, simple message in something like this. And maybe a box and whisker with mean or median will do the same thing. Do you think there's a need to present box plots with farm survey data? No, Dashina, unless you're trying to go forward to future climate. That's the case where you might be able to use a box and whisker. Carolyn, does it matter what the spatial distribution of the farm sites are? I don't think so. I think they're too small in the range to have many truly different weather stations, except in the Kenya example. Blue is the baseline, yes. And the red is the future climate. But the interpretation here is that certain farmers have low yield all the time, and the better ones have lower yield some of the time. Well, I'm not sure I got that right. We'll wait for about 2 more comments and then, okay, this is 5 GCMs, yes. But for Garrett and the Pakistanis, I think we're interpreting that a box and whisker plot would be better. Or, let me back up. Let's see if I can do that. This one, okay? This figure for the Pakistanis would have done the same thing. You would have had 155 points on the line, each representing the mean of the single 30 years. And you could have shown 5 different climates on here. This would work. Let me get back to the questions here, if I can understand them. Oh. Sonali is describing the possibility of using farm locations, or at least showing them where they are in the world. I think that's one of these little things that could be a nice visual that shows where your site is in your country. I would not show the whole world, I would just show your country, and then with where your region is. Larif says, can we do probability distributions instead of cumulative distributions? Don't they come out the same? If you're talking about showing what's a typical, what is it called? T-statistic? A normal distribution? If you can make that work. Gita, if the farm locations are within 5 to 6 kilometers, is it necessary to generate farm climate for each farm separately? In my opinion, Gita, no, but Alex would say yes. So, and the reason it might be different is if you have elevation. If you're within, half a degree variation in temperature, my interpretation is it makes no sense. Elevation is flat. In your case, 5, 6 kilometers, no. Unless you had a true rain gauge that said the weather was different. Yeah, Murthy describes the same thing. Everybody else can see the chats though, right? Yeah.
Yep.
We have an hour, right? I should probably keep going. Shall we move on? So a test plot would tell you that rainfall. Let data tell you what analyses you need to do. I think Dashinamurthy is describing this from our typical experience with weather, with rainfall, that's what's different with a model simulation depending how far you get. And just the ballpark statement is when you get to 20 or 30 kilometers, then the rainfall is different. I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide where I'm hoping to be. Okay. This is one more of these cases of looking at future climate distribution. Now, this is from IGB, and they're looking at wheat yields during the baseline period compared to a future period with must be 1 GCM. As before, I would say you want to identify the site and whether the site's irrigated or not. And in this case, the baseline is probably an indication of possible real yield change over time. Okay, so I have no problem with the figure on the left. But the figure on the right has a serious problem because remember that we're imposing the delta method for temperature and CO2 on top of the historical baseline pattern, and that historical baseline pattern has the same sequence of good and bad rainfall years or even temperatures over multiple years. So what we are wanting this to do is that the 30 future years are representative of future probable weather and not a time series of weather. So that trend line in the future is not particularly helpful.
So there should be no trend because it's all the same climatology.
Yeah. Okay. On the left figure, if you were trying to talk to someone about what caused yield change over the last 30 years, that's useful. For the purpose of what we're trying to do for future climate situation, I think we need to basically not use this style graph and use a box and whisker style. And in that case, the box and whisker is interannual variation. Is the mean yield detrended? No. The trend would be the same. So I'm suggesting not to show an x-axis time series in any of the visuals that you show. I think it's misleading to say that that's what you're expecting to happen because it's superimposed on the baseline, which may or may not happen again. I think the point you're making here, you're losing the point in the variation there because you're making a point that in the future GCM weather, you have a reduction in yield by 26%. And you're missing the big point, and you could do this with 2 box and whiskers. Okay, moving on. This is from IGB, and it just came in late last night. I'm not sure I'm interpreting this yet, but wheat simulation survey. Now, this is a nice box and whisker, and it shows 2 different crop models. What I'm not sure on is I don't think this is the baseline or future GCM. Is this the survey data? What is the source of the variation here? Yes, survey data, and the variation is only among the survey sites within a year. Again, try to keep the GCM analysis as a separate statement or separate look. The next slide may help a little bit with this. I may come back to this. This is one more. This is also from IGB. And again, the comment would be is that you need to identify the crop in the region and the year, or in this case, maybe it's not the year, it's a future 30-year simulation. And the question here is, again, is the variation in the box and whisker coming from the interannual variation, and the mean is coming from the climate effect? And I cannot interpret this. I'd like to have Alex and Sonley give some feedback. DSAT on the left, APSIM on the right, and any help on this one from somebody? It'd be nice to have Subhash's volume turned up to see what he's saying. Sorry, these are multi-model averages, GCMs. Okay, it's interannual variation. All right. That would be good. But, and in this case, it's interannual variation, but how many farms? Single site? We're mixing up farms and, wow.
It could be the mean of the 76 for each
Okay,
year.
you took the average. I worry about mixing up the variation from two different sources.
You know, if he's taken the mean
Of what?
of each farm,
Yep.
of all the farms, and then doing that for each year, so it shows the variability.
Is the average from the farms per year? Or is it a single farm averaged over 30 years? So we're playing with two sources. Average of 76 farms for each year. You realize what happens when you do that, you're aggregating more or less, which means the box and whisker is really small. Let me do something here. I have one or two visuals that may answer this question in a generic sense, and then we'll come back to this. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, this is it, right here. Let's discuss this and then come back to Subhash's question. This is the last really important visual. Remember that you have variation coming from multiple farms and multiple years. So two sources. The survey data has multiple farms, but typically 1 year. So all of the variation in that CDF is almost all farm to farm, unless you have a tiny weather variation within the region, and I don't know how many weather stations there are. So it's mostly farm to farm. The variation in these current and future climate scenarios comes from the multiple years. So you have variation that comes from interannual variation. Now, the teams that are simulating all survey fields, and they're going to do each one of these with 30 years of current weather and then a future weather and maybe 5 total weathers. What they're going to do is to calculate a climate change ratio for each farm, and that's based upon the average yield for that farm in the future compared to the average yield in the current. So the economists are not using interannual variation. So I think we have a little discussion as to how we're doing that. When Subhash says he took the average of 76 farms for a single year, I don't think that was the way to do this. The economist would have needed the 30 years of weather for baseline and the future 5 climates, and then that distribution, that average value given to the economist, and then the economist will calculate a climate change ratio. So the last point on this is, when do you use a box and whisker? When you're simulating a single site, a sentinel site for the same region, or a single farm. And this is where you do what Alex asked about, these 20 GCMs, the mean and the variation, that type of thing. And you can show that type of visual. So let's go back to the slide that, see if I can get back there. Okay. Subhash, are you live? Make a comment. Does everybody see Roberto's comment? The economists are taking the average yield over the 30 years of weather for any given scenario, and from that to calculate climate change ratio. So if you're showing interannual variability for a different purpose, you should really work with a single site and truly show interannual, but do not mix up farm variation with interannual variation. Subhash, do you want to try to explain this one? Maybe we can't hear him. Is that true?
No, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
KSI says Subhash's microphone is enabled. Maybe you're on mute, Subhash. Keep going? Yeah. Okay. We keep waiting for the next typing to come along, and I'm not sure it's happening. So we're almost finished here. I have a couple of slides at the end that came from Sri Lanka. So maybe we'll do that. Here's one slide. If you're planning to show something on adaptation, then document what you did through changing a life cycle, growing degree days, or drought tolerance, what you did for hybrid rice, or document management change, nitrogen, sowing date. Ah, Subhash, you're good.
We can hear something now.
Something's coming. I'll go back to that slide if it's live. He's still typing, so it's not there. We haven't gotten to the Sri Lankan slides. So we'll get to before we finish. I'm going to jump ahead to the Sri Lankan slides if we can find them. I don't want these. Ah, where'd we go? Ah, the other group has them.
could share them.
Yeah. Think that works? I thought we got one of these added. We didn't.
Here, maybe
Not there. Does that work here? I'm sort of skipping through something here. This is an example that came from sugarcane in South Africa. Now, this shows box and whisker for 5 different GCMs over 2 different models compared to baseline. And again, this would have to be for a single site, and this is showing the interannual variation. So this would be one of the, like the case of 20 that Alex was looking for. Let me back up. I think that works. Let me finish the concluding slide, and then I'll try to see if we can't load up the ones from Sri Lanka. What we need to see are your figures and tables, and we need to know how well you've calibrated the cultivars, the data that you used.
Hello.
Give the cultivar coefficients and figures and tables
Hello.
on those. Hello. Are you there? This Subhash? I hear him. Hello, go ahead. So you can move that over there if you want.
I think so. You want me to try?
Yeah, let's try it.
Okay, so we're going to try to stop sharing the KSI and start sharing from my computer here. I hope this is going to work.
And maybe not. Can you just pull the screen over?
You have to share it first. But this is saying, I don't think we're going to be able to do this because it's saying it's incompatible with
Default settings of your version
Google
of
Chrome, which I'm using. So I don't know. I don't know if the Sri Lanka slides went to KSI so that they could show them.
There were 2 sets, one Aisha and Nisanka. Set 2 different sets. Where are we going? Here we go.
Okay.
Someone found them. This is the first of 2 from Sri Lanka. And this would be a statement of what the genetic coefficients are for the APSIM or RISA model. Unless you can simplify it a little bit, that's basically the critical information. So I think that's reasonable. If we could do the next slide. This would be a table of genetic coefficients. This one is showing a little bit of the one-to-one. I think it's reasonable. On the left would be a statement of predicting the life cycle for 2 different cultivars. It's a little bit tricky because you're implying better accuracy than exists, because what you've taken is 3 different phenological stages in 3 different sets. So the real statement of model predictability is within each of the 3 subsets, but this is reasonable. The upper right is a simulated versus observed yield, and I think that's acceptable as well.
It says 1 cultivar.
One cultivar? It looks like you have two cultivars because you have the top and bottom on the left. Is there a reason to do that? To have the complexity? Or is this because you had two different data sets? Ooh, why not put them together in one season?
I don't think.
Oh, the top one is experiment, and the second one is something else? Variety trials. Well, I'm not sure. I think this is where Peter Thorburn and some of us were not agreeing with Daniel Wallach on this. You have two sources of information driving your varieties. Which one did you use? Or this is the way it works for both? I would be almost inclined just to use the top one. It looks cleaner, it's singular, particularly if the traits were the same. Yeah, yeah. Remember, you don't have a lot of space. Maybe for your final report, you can do both and explain them separately. For a poster, it's probably good enough to take the top left. But what I would hope is that genetic coefficients were the same across both sets. Otherwise, you're not consistent. Do we have more from Sri Lanka? There was another set that Nisanka sent. I saw one other one from Sri Lanka where there was a time series of weather years, and I think it has the same issue that when we were talking about the IGB time series. There's not really a point in showing time series for future. So here's where any wrap up for the next 5 minutes? Are you ready for New York? If you have questions, send them to me or the climate scientist. Alex is not available right now. Okay, the time series shows uncertainty from year to year. I think that can be shown in a box and whisker too. Yeah, that's what that is. You have time series or years in the future, and they're not real years because it comes from the superimposed on the baseline. The baseline has certain characteristics of temperature, and it comes through. So I think a box and whisker may do the same thing for how many climate records? You have 20 there. I think it looks busy. I think that well, we're looking at it. You're not looking at it, but you have 20 different lines in that Karunagala, and that could be replaced with 20 box and whiskers. Of course, that's a lot too.
Actually, yeah, that's right. 20
Right.
box and whiskers.
20
one
box
for
and
each
whiskers. Yes,
GCM.
one per GCM. Separate box and whisker per year? No.
Per GCM.
Per GCM. Yes. Okay. I think it will do the same because on your visual, I really can't tell which line is which. It's a wonderful, you call it kaleidoscope of colors, but to make sense out of it doesn't come across. My conclusion is that, yeah, it would not show how the data compares across GCMs. Well, why not? You'd get a different mean and a different box and whisker.
That's what that is.
Yeah, yeah. I would say take a look at the very nice colorful slide that the Pakistanis did. I think that's the way to show this if, yeah, the problem, yeah, okay, that's farmer variation. You're right. Yeah. The South Africa one was a box and whisker. Okay, Geeta is going to connect with Sonali, and I think let the Sri Lankans know as well. I think this is a good one for the climate scientists to help on. How do you want to show the climate scenarios? Any other comments? I'm sure you're working on your poster and your chapters. And we'll see you in New York. And if you need advice on how to present, let your ARP know, or different area. Larif says, do you want the posters in advance? I think Carolyn does not want to print them all out in advance, so. Now, in advance is a different way. Yeah, bring your poster in person, carry it. Now, the only way I would say poster in advance, if you have a poster and you have questions on how it looks, you could send an electronic copy of it for somebody to look at. That's possible, but don't expect it to be printed by Carolyn's group in New York. So, looking at it is a different question. Every once in a while there's a voice. Yeah, so we can look at PowerPoints ahead of time with any one of us, but you have to print it yourself. We don't know how long our U.S. government shutdown is going to go.
Okay.
Are we good? Any more questions? Nice to communicate across the world, and I hope you have a good evening.
It's good to see everybody too.
We can see you. We're sorry that you can't see us. Geeta's smiling.
So we'll
That's
see
good.
many of you in New York. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. 30 plus people. Wow.
Awesome.
Okay, that's good.
I do have a question for KSI. Was this video recorded? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the video's been recorded. If anybody needs to review it, it should be available on the KSIConnect site.
We will provide the link by tomorrow. Okay, good,
great.
good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. See you in New York. Interesting.